This week, I'm sharing a fan favorite episode, and I know why this one landed with listeners. It's a pattern I've seen in myself and in my clients. You're doing the mindset work, but you still find yourself frustrated, stuck, anxious, and creeping on burnout. So instead of trying harder to mindset your way into flow, learn how to step away from chronic stress and why creating nervous system safety is the real first step to building the life, love, and leadership you crave. Welcome to Too Much, Not Enough, the podcast helping 6- and 7-figure female leaders understand how chasing success is causing low self-worth and anxiety, and how awakening your divine feminine energy will reignite flow, abundance, and ease, making you feel excited about life again. I'm your host, Hannah O'Donovan, channel and activator of the untamed divine feminine. Let's get into it. In this episode, you'll learn how to identify the signs you're living in chronic stress, even if your life looks successful or you're seemingly handling it well. Create safety in your body so you can stop outsourcing your power and self-abandoning and start feeling like yourself again. And use simple somatic tools to shift from survival mode to empowered feminine presence. We talk a lot on this podcast about aligning yourself with the life you desire, calling in your dream partner, or breaking patterns to get more of what you want in life. But the truth is, none of that is possible if you're caught in cycles of chronic stress, spending majority of your time in fight-flight. You literally do not have the resources available to dedicate to building new thoughts and behaviors when you're stuck in survival mode. So today we're going to talk about how to step away from stress, because it may seem obvious that we need to do that, but it's certainly not easy. First, I think it's important to talk about why chronic stress is so bad. Beyond the sort of general reasons that most of us know that, it takes a toll on your body and it's not great and it doesn't feel good, and maybe you're more reactive when you're stressed, so you'd rather not be. And that conversation starts with the nervous system. And I love talking about the nervous system because I think that it is at its core such a smart system that can also sabotage us so greatly if we're not in tune with its needs and what is happening. So the nervous system, and specifically your autonomic nervous system, is very complicated, as are most things that happen in your body. But to simplify it, we're going to look at the two main states. That is your sympathetic state of the nervous system, which is sort of fight, flight, survival mode. And then the parasympathetic, which is known as rest and digest mode, and also can sometimes be considered creator mode. We say that because, it's the place from which you can create more connection. It's the place from which you can create new behaviors and thoughts, as well as the place from which you can actually create ideas and art and so forth. And the goal is to have these two systems operate in harmony. And really to spend most of your time in rest and digest, not all of your time. So the idea is not to become so calm and down-regulated that you're always in your parasympathetic and you never go into your sympathetic. In fact, if you did that, you would die. You have to move between the two. It's just that you only want to access your state of sympathetic fight-flight when you need it, rather than existing in that state on a more permanent basis. And that's because when you go into that upregulated fight-flight, your system is very smartly wired for survival, and it diverts resources away from certain functions in your body to areas, providing more energy to those areas that are needed in situations essentially of life or death, of survival. So imagine getting chased by a wild animal. you are going to need to be able to run fast, climb, really use a lot of energy to get away or to sort of suss out the situation. You are going to need to make decisions quickly, and therefore different parts of your brain need to be activated. And you may even need to play dead, which is where that freeze collapse side of the sympathetic nervous system comes into play, where you can actually like slow down your body processes enough that that wild animal might think that you are dead and leave you alone. So that is all to say that the sympathetic state of your nervous system can sometimes get a bad rap, but it is a really important part of our survival here on the planet. It gives us the ability to face dangerous, life-threatening situations and to have a chance of coming out the other side of them. Where it gets messy is that in our modern society, a lot of things that are not actually life or death threat feel threatening. And these are often called perceived threats. So for example, because we are not in a situation anymore where we are running away from wild animals very often, like we used to be many centuries ago, but we still have this stress response, this activation response in our nervous system. For example, we may receive an email or a message from our boss, and it says, "Need to talk urgently, book time for this afternoon." Now, in isolation, that can mean anything, but to you, you're like, oh my goodness, your heart rate might start speeding up. You might start to get sweaty palms. Maybe your stomach feels uneasy. You're like, what have I done wrong? What's going to happen? Am I getting fired? Going to all of these possibilities. That is a perceived threat because you don't actually have like a real threat in front of you. Your boss hasn't said, we need to talk because I'm going to fire you. They've just said we need to talk, and it could be about anything, but you're interpreting it as something unsafe, as something threatening, and your body is getting activated into that sympathetic state. Now, because of the world that we live in, where we're constantly inundated with the bad news cycle, social media, stress, it's never ending with work and life and all of that, our systems are a little bit more attuned to being activated, to being in that fight, flight, and to maybe remain there. And that's not even to talk about people who have experienced serious trauma and the way that you get caught in fight, flight because of that. And staying in those states of activation and not returning to your parasympathetic rest and digest state to recuperate, recalibrate, and build your resources back up, that means that when you go and stay in fight, flight, and your body diverts the resources as it's meant to do away from digestion, for example, and increases your heart rate and your blood pressure, and it tenses your muscles. If you stay there, that is going to have long-term effects because you are not using your energy resources or the systems in your body effectively. You're using them in the emergency scenario, but on a more long-term basis. And that is where the real danger, the real threat of chronic stress comes in. Because whether you are experiencing real threat or perceived threat, if you are having that reaction and you are not coming out of that reaction and returning to baseline, then those diverted resources, those changes in your body are going to have long-term effects. For example, if you're diverting energy away from your digestion and you're slowing down your digestion, you're going to start perhaps noticing long-term digestive issues. And this goes even deeper, and I won't get into the, layers of science here, but essentially there is a lot of research happening now that is very clearly linking chronic stress to long-term chronic illness, like Alzheimer's, like heart disease. To get even more specific, those who experience PTSD, untreated PTSD, and are constantly caught in these cycles of activation and fight flight, there are studies that are actually showing that there are areas in their brain that are shrinking. Their cells are being damaged in this process, and then they are dying off. And those areas of perhaps rational thought, and so on and so forth are shrinking. So that is all to not scare you, but to impress upon you how serious chronic stress is. I think sometimes we look at stress and think it's just this inevitable part of life, which it is, but in short bursts. So we should be doing everything we can to not only reduce stress in our life, but also build our systems, specifically our nervous systems, to have the capacity to be more resilient and more flexible in switching between these states of fight, flight, and rest and digest. We are designed to have ebb and flow in our nervous systems, to consistently discharge the energy that builds up. And when it gets stuck, that's where the problems arise. When energy stops discharging and starts causing symptoms. And I'll say for me, when I was living way out of alignment and under immense stress, and not necessarily stress, the obvious kind of stress like work stress, but stress in my relationship, and specifically the stress that arises from constantly self-abandoning and going against what your body needs. You know, your body tells you no, and you say, not today, ignore it and charge ahead. Those symptoms that I didn't realize at the time, but in retrospect that arise were, I was having major digestive issues, really bad constipation, and also really bad indigestion. Like I would eat something, like take a bite of an apple, I would feel so full that it felt like my chest wanted to crack open. I was losing my hair. I was not able to be as rational about things. My anxieties were out of control. Like my normal fear of spiders was on steroids. My normal discomfort with flying meant that I was completely avoiding getting on a plane. Like just all these things were amplified, and there were these physical and mental symptoms that were coming up from being in a state of chronic stress all of the time. And our nervous systems are responsible for how we think, feel, and behave. And when you restore more regulation to your system through things like somatic work, getting in touch with the body, meditation, mindfulness, the list is a little bit endless, you will think, feel, and act more confidently and aligned with your best self. And you will also have access to create the new thoughts, behaviors, and patterns that are required to step into the life that you desire. Because that's the thing. If you are constantly in a state of chronic stress and activation, it actually doesn't matter how much mindset work you're doing. It doesn't matter how much therapy you're doing, because your body does not physically have the resources, or the extra energy, I should say, to divert to creating the new neural pathways that are required to, seal in a new behavior, new actions. Your resources, all the energy that you are literally taking in through food and that your body is creating, are being diverted to your survival mode. And so if you are thinking, man, nothing I'm doing is sticking, this makes no sense, that could be why. Because if you haven't addressed creating that sort of sense of safety in your body so that you can really spend majority of your time in rest and digest and feel sort of open and available to making real change in your life, then that change is just not going to stick. It won't. It doesn't matter how hard you try, because you are not recreating the new neural pathways that are required to embed the change that you are seeking. And there's so much more I could say here about the brain and how it works during stressful events, and things like amygdala hijack, which is what happens when you go into a stress response and part of your brain can go offline, the kind of rational thought part of your brain can go offline. And it's why when you are upset, you are maybe unable to communicate in the way that you'd like to. You can't find the words. You're not thinking rationally, and you're not able to remain calm and have a productive conversation. These are all things that actually happen in the brain that take certain areas of it offline, again, to divert resources to, if you were really being chased by a wild animal, to make quick decisions and not take in all the other information that does not need to be taken in that moment. Again, our systems are very smart. But in certain situations, they are not helping us evolve and move forward if we are not paying attention to the states that we are caught in. So the next question is, if chronic stress is so bad for me and being in this activated state all the time is really detrimental to my long-term health, then what do I do to try and step away from stress? Great question. I would love to answer that. So the first thing is mindfulness, which at its core is being present in your life, being present when you are doing your mundane everyday things that often happen a little bit on autopilot, and being present in your connection with others. Because mindfulness actually strengthens your prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that is used for rational, complex thought. And it keeps stimuli, so the things that are coming in through your senses to give you information about the situation that you are in, the environment you are in. It keeps your stimuli from becoming an alarm, which sends you into that fear cycle and then activates you into that stress response, and so on and so forth. But the thing about mindfulness is that if you are addicted to stress, if you are used to things being chaotic and stressful in your life, and your nervous system has become attuned to being in a state of fight, flight, sympathetic majority of the time, it's going to think that that is safe and that is where it should stay. And so diving into mindfulness, which is really about slowing down and, like I said, being present, it's not going to interpret that as safe. And therefore, rest, which is the gateway into getting out of cycles of chronic stress, is essential, but it can feel super scary. And that's totally fine. Like, for example, and I give this example because it's something that I struggle with, I may have a weekend coming up where I'm like, whoa, I don't really have anything on this weekend. It's really quiet. That hasn't been the case in a while. I've been kind of going from work to social life to, personal things I've needed to do. I actually can kind of take a break this weekend. That sounds really nice. I would love to just sit and read a book and do nothing. And then this little gremlin in my mind is like, yeah, but do you want to do that? I don't know. That doesn't seem great. That's going to leave you alone with your thoughts. And is that a good place to be? Should you just be taking a break? There's about 1 million things on your to-do list. Do you not want to do those instead? Actually, the body is now coming in. Okay, I'm feeling this uncomfortable sensation when I think about just resting and relaxing. But that's exactly what I want and what I need to do. But there's some resistance coming up telling me, nah, that's not it. We don't want to do that. And that makes perfect sense, because if I've been going, and my system's been attuned to chaos and doing, and the sense of worth and worthiness that comes from doing, producing, then this idea of all of a sudden slowing down seems dangerous. It is a perceived threat, because if when I'm productive, I am worthy, then when I am not productive, that must mean I am not worthy, which is absolutely not true, but is a very real feeling of unsafety in the body and in the mind. And so while rest can feel scary, it is essential. And in order to get to the true rest that your body desires, so that you aren't hitting burnout, so that you aren't caught in these cycles of chronic stress, you need to take baby steps. Don't try to clear an entire weekend and commit yourself to reading and doing nothing else. Maybe start with 1 hour of rest where you are going to tune out all the external noise, all of the external stimuli, and just take an hour for yourself in quietness and stillness. And if even that feels too much, because it could, and that's totally okay, then maybe start with 5 minutes. Okay, for 5 minutes, I am just going to focus on my breath. I am not going to think about my to-do list. I am not going to touch my phone. I am not going to have music on in the background or the TV on. I am just going to tune in and breathe. And if that is also too much, then we just break it down even further. Maybe it's 30 seconds to start. Whatever it is that feels accessible and doable and doesn't put your body into a full state of fight flight, because then you're just going to avoid it. And then you build from there. But the thing is, rest is essential. Slowing down is essential to becoming more present and therefore more mindful in your everyday life, which is essential to breaking free from cycles of chronic stress and from being in your activated sympathetic fight-flight mode. And remember, stress in itself is not inherently bad. It is an important part of life. It is something that motivates us, and it's something that keeps us safe from real danger. It is the long-term chronic stress that is the thing that we want to avoid. And therefore, you are not engaging in rest and slowing down and down-regulating in order to stay there forever. Because I think that's something that we get a little caught up in. It's like, oh, I need to be calm and zen and centered and in control of my feelings at all times. And then the minute I get activated, I'm like, it's not working. That's not true at all. What we're doing by leaning into rest and mindfulness, and in a moment here, I'm going to get into a couple of exercises that you can do that I think might be really helpful if this is something that you are really like, I am determined to step away from stress. I'm going to do this. We'll get into some exercises. But the idea of all of this is that you're building up capacity and flexibility in your nervous system so that when you do get activated, you're still moving into that sympathetic state, but you are then able to maybe recognize what's going on, identify that the threat that feels so dangerous to you is not a real threat, it's a perceived threat. And then you're able to down-regulate yourself more quickly so that you can have a calm and considered conversation, so that you don't lash out, so that you aren't feeling really uncomfortable sensations in your body that are lasting for a long time and keeping you from living the life that you want to. Or, for example, you may be going through a particularly stressful period at work or maybe in life. Maybe you've just had a baby or you're moving into a new phase of parenting. And these are the things in life that are unavoidable. There is going to be discomfort and pain and things in life that happen. But your ability to have a more expanded nervous system will help you through that. You'll be able to say, I recognize that this stress is unavoidable right now. And I also know that while I'm experiencing this stress, I'm going to prioritize moments of rest and recalibration. And or when this period of extreme stress is over, I'm going to make sure I complete this stress cycle and spend some time very consciously coming back to a baseline in my parasympathetic nervous system. So it's not about saying I'm going to move into parasympathetic and stay there for the rest of my life, because actually, scientifically, biologically, if you stayed in parasympathetic, you would keep like down-regulating to a point where you'd then go into like freeze and collapse, and then you would actually die. So you don't want to do that, but you want to be able to say, okay, it's necessary for me to get activated here. I'm going to get activated, and then I'm going to return to baseline. In order to start building a habit in your life and build that capacity and flexibility to then be able to be in rest and digest, and then have the resources to dedicate towards creating the life that you want, creating the patterns and behaviors you want, creating the connection that you want, it starts with creating safety in the body. And how do we do that, you ask? Creating safety in the body is a little bit more nuanced and layered than what I'm about to share with you, especially if you have experienced trauma in your life, and particularly that you are dealing with the ongoing effects of unresolved trauma. However, this is a great introduction, and if you're interested in going further, then I highly recommend reaching out, connecting with me, and I can give you some resources and point you in the direction of some further work that you can dive into. But to start, the foundations of a body-based approach to life or creating somatic resilience starts with a baseline of quality sleep, nutrition, and hydration. Those are essential. If you are not getting quality sleep, you are not hydrating, appropriately and you are not eating decently well. I'm not talking about needing to be super clean here or on some sort of specific diet, but you're not feeding your body ultra processed junk all the time, or on the flip side of that, you're not feeding your body enough. If those are not taken care of, then the idea of creating safety in your body, it's not going to happen. So once you've kind of focused on that base, then you can start turning towards some exercises that build awareness around how your body feels, when it feels safe and doesn't feel safe. Because that's the thing. You might not even know. You might be going along with your life and doing the things that you need to do, and you're not even aware consciously, because the body is always subconsciously aware, because it is always figuring out, am I safe? Am I not? Am I safe? Am I not? That's its job. But you might not be consciously aware of certain people, environments, and situations that make you feel really uncomfortable. And therefore, you are lacking safety when you are in those situations, environments, or with those people. And so the first and foremost thing before diving into anything else when it comes to building nervous system capacity and stepping away from stress is creating a felt sense of safety. And that means your body needs to feel safe, not just be told it is. This means tending to your routines, your environments, your relationships, and your internal cues. And like I said, understanding, do I feel safe here? For example, the TTC, taking the TTC, the transit system here in Toronto, is extremely overstimulating to me. And it's something that when I was dealing with my most stressful, most anxious periods in life, I would avoid at all costs. And that would then stem into me actually delaying leaving my house because I knew I had to take the TTC to get somewhere. And that would then mean that I was chronically late for things, which would in turn add more stress into my life. But I, at the time, didn't realize that I dealt with overstimulation issues and that my body was taking in way too much stimulus on the TTC because of everything that's going on, the smells, the sounds, the situations that you can find yourself in, the physical touch of people brushing up against you, which I hate. My body was taking in all of this information, but I wasn't conscious to the fact that it was making me really deeply uncomfortable and therefore feeling unsafe. And so I started avoiding the TTC, but I wasn't conscious to why. And so once I started tuning in with my body and realizing, I get overstimulated very easily. The TTC is a place, is an environment where high stimulation is always a possibility, and therefore it feels unsafe to me. I would have never been able to do anything about that until I tuned in and really understood what was happening with my internal perception, my external perception, the space between of taking in stimuli through my senses and then processing it through my body. I wouldn't have realized. I also wouldn't have realized if I didn't start tuning in and really understanding where my body felt unsafe, that my previous partner was not a safe person for me. Because on its surface, he wasn't dangerous. He wasn't someone that logically looked or seemed like an actual threat to me. But once I started creating that awareness and really tuning into where my body felt safe and where it didn't, I wouldn't have realized that my fist always tensed up around this person. And therefore, that must indicate a felt sense of unsafety. And the same thing is the opposite. I also started paying attention to where I was feeling safe in my life. What environments felt good? I love being in water. Water feels, especially cold water, feels really nurturing and safe to me. And I only realized that because I started paying attention to where I had felt sense of safety. So tuning into that awareness and just starting with that can be huge. And I just want to make a kind of footnote to this. That does not mean you all of a sudden stop doing anything that makes you feel unsafe, because that is not how life works. Yes, if you realize that a person in your life is really not aligned or helping your healing, understandable that you may need to cut them out or reduce the time you spend with them. But the idea is to not realize where you feel safe and unsafe and only ever do the safe things anymore. Because the way that our bodies adapt, it will become more and more difficult to do the unsafe things if we just avoid them. The idea is to just gather data and then realize the situations in which we might need to build up or create a more intentional routine around doing the things that feel more uncomfortable. So the next layer to this is cultivating awareness and then response. So you already kind of start doing that as you're identifying what feels safe, what doesn't, and gathering that data. You're starting to build your awareness when you do that. But the next step in it is to say, okay, once I have that data, can I pause, feel what's happening in my body, and then choose a response instead of a reaction? And like I always say, sounds simple, it's not easy. And this just comes with time. And also, like I said, bringing in other work, other modalities that help with the way that our brain naturally reacts to things. I'm not going to get into that here, but this would be the next step, creating awareness and then pausing and then responding rather than reacting. And a final sort of first step, let's call it, into stepping away from stress and building up somatic resilience and capacity in your nervous system has to do with connection. Because we as human beings regulate best with others. Co-regulation is a superpower. We cannot survive solely on our own. We need others for survival, and therefore we are attuned, we are wired to connection, feeling really good because we need it. And so this idea of connection with safe, regulated people actually can create more regulation within oneself, which can help with this feeling of leaning into rest, relaxation, and mindfulness. Because when we feel safe and regulated, our bodies are able to access presence. Our minds are able to access presence, which is what we need to then keep building these skills. So one thing about me is I love making things practical. So here are 3 tools that you can take with you and use to start building the felt sense of safety, the awareness and then response, as well as the prioritizing of connection and presence. All things that are essential to start to step away from chronic stress. The first exercise, which please feel free to do these as I explain them, follow along with it, is called orienting. So orienting is kind of what it sounds like. It is orienting yourself to your space. The idea is that you look around your space, you look in front of you, to the side of you, you can look up and down or even behind you, and you do this slowly and intentionally, and you name 3 things that you can see and 3 things that you can hear. And while you're doing this, really feeling your feet or your seat on the ground below you. And this exercise signals safety to your nervous system. Because if you are in a state of threat and survival, you don't have time to look around, take in your environment, and name 3 things you see, name 3 things you hear. So if you are actively engaging in a practice where you can do that, you're signaling to your nervous system, this is a safe environment because I have the time to slow down and do this. The next tool, exercise, is tuning into the breath. Breath is incredibly powerful when you want to cultivate more calm in your system. There are a few different breath types you can do. One is the box breath, which is one you may have heard of. It's quite well known. And that is inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and then you can repeat that. There's also a relaxing breath, which is basically exhaling for longer than you inhale. When you exhale longer than your inhale, you're signaling safety and calm to your nervous system. So for example, you'd breathe in for a count of 4 and breathe out for a count of 8. And feel free, if either of those feel engaging to you, then go ahead, do it now. Start that breath. And you can repeat it for a few cycles, and you'll likely, if you're in tune enough with your body, start feeling the effects. And they really say that like 1 to 2 minutes of breath can make a huge difference. But I personally started by that breathe in for 4, out for 8. And I do it like 2 or 3 times when I was feeling stressed, because that's what I had access to at the time. And it made a huge difference. It became such a habit in my life. The beautiful part of breath work is you can also upregulate with breath work. You can activate yourself. So the thing about our nervous systems, which I kind of mentioned at the top, is they're not as simple as 2 states. There's multiple states and then there's blended states. And so what can happen is you can be in rest and digest, but you can go further into that where you kind of disconnect, disassociate, and freeze. And you're feeling maybe really lethargic and like you can't do anything or you don't want to do anything, but you perhaps need to. Perhaps you need to get on a call, you need to get on a meeting, whatever it looks like. You can also use breath to activate yourself a little further up into a state so that you are alert and connected. You could use an energy breath style where you breathe in for 2 and forcefully exhale out for 1. So now you can repeat that multiple times. I wouldn't recommend going too long with that breath because it can make you dizzy. And if at any point you're doing any style of breath work and you feel dizzy, or in some cases your hands can cramp, just return to your regular breath and that should dissipate quite quickly. Now, the final tool that I'll leave you with here is the somatic check-in. That is as simple as closing your eyes if that feels safe in the environment you're in, placing a hand on your chest and or your belly. If that's not accessible to you, you can even just hold your elbows or maybe even clasp your hands together. Anywhere that you can sort of make intentional and caring contact with your body. And simply ask yourself, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? And what do I need? And it's okay if you don't have an answer to these questions. Simply engaging in this exercise of asking is great. It is showing your body that you care, that you're tuning in, and that you're interested in building awareness. And eventually answers will come the more you practice this. So that is an overview of why chronic stress is bad, why you would even want to step away from chronic stress, and how to even start the process. Because you may have tried this before and not succeeded, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with you or that you're broken. You are having a natural reaction to being caught in cycles of stress and perhaps burnout. And the very best way to start, which is the way that I started, is with small intentional steps, micro practices that you can incorporate into your everyday, and then start building from there. Don't try to climb the mountain all in one go. Start with getting to base camp. You can chill out there, reset, and then decide how you're gonna conquer the next section. Until next time. Are you still stuck in the cycle of overdrive and feeling anxious even after trying things like meditating, journaling, maybe even resting? These tools only work at the level of the mind and can't create the safety your body is craving when your nervous system is dysregulated. That's where the somatic return journey comes in. A free 5-day audio experience designed to help high-achieving women like you finally regulate your nervous system, awaken your divine feminine energy, and reconnect with the part of you that leads with flow and not force, no matter what's happening around you. In less than 15 minutes a day, you'll feel more grounded, empowered, and emotionally agile by this time next week. Head to the link in the show notes to get started.